Hi, 3 and 4-year-old leaders. We're preparing for September 15th in our series called Back to Basics. Last week, we started talking about the prophet Elijah. Elijah was God's prophet to the Israelite people to help turn them back toward God. There's a king serving in the land right now, King Ahab, and he was a bad, bad king. He did terrible things to to rule over the people. And then he created all of these crazy new gods and made all of these rules to help to point people toward a false God. And with false gods, you don't see the same power that we see in our one true God. In fact, in our story today, we're going to get a good picture of that as Elijah is told by God to go to King Ahab and challenge him against his gods. And let's see who the one true God is. Let's let God put himself to the test and show everybody who he truly is. And so he went to Ahab, asked for Ahab to meet him at Mount Carmel. When they met at Mount Carmel, Ahab and the prophets of Baal built an altar, and on their altar they put a bull. And then they started doing all kinds of dancing and singing and things to try to get their God to respond to them. They had to do all of these different practices to show their God that they were faithful to him so that he could respond. On the other hand, Elijah and the one true God built an altar out of wood. They built a trench around the altar that included large stones. And then they slaughtered a bull and put the bull on top of the altar. And after that was all done, Elijah told the people to go and bring water and drowned that whole area with water so that when the fires came, then there would be proof that God was the one true God, that there was no possible way that any person could take credit for what God was going to do. And so they drenched the area with water, and then as the people are worshiping Baal and singing songs to him and dancing, Elijah kind of taunts them a little bit, or at least that's how I think of it. And I might respond the same way. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I'd be a little bit more gracious. But he told them to sing louder, dance bigger, do more. Surely your God will respond to that. And then in the meantime, he's over here and he tells the people, all right, we're going to pray. I'm going to pray. And he prayed to God and he said, Lord, answer me so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God. He didn't do a big dance. He didn't do a big song. He didn't do a big show. All he did was go straight to the God that we've learned about in our memory verses. We can go straight to God and ask him for the wisdom that we need. He went straight to God, and God sent fire. God sent fire from above so that he could prove that there was no possible way that man could take credit for that, because fire doesn't come from up above unless it's like a lightning strike, but typically that's even from the bottom, right? And so the fire came, burned up the bull, burned up all of the wood that the bull was on, burned up all of the stones in the trench, and the dust, scripture says. That was a hot, hot fire, which doesn't happen when you have a wet surface, right? You don't get that hot of a fire. And if you did get that hot of a fire, everything would be, it doesn't happen like that. It would have to be God made that happen. And so when the people saw this, they immediately looked at Elijah and said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. And so they turned from their pagan worship of Baal, and they acknowledge that God is the one true God. Now, King Ahab obviously was not going to be happy about this because he is more concerned about himself. And so he shared this news with Jezebel. Jezebel got very mad. Jezebel's his wife, and chased Elijah, must have wanted to kill him or something. And so Elijah is out in the wilderness, but God is there with him, and spends that entire time Elijah's in the wilderness, encouraging him and telling him not to give up, that God's one plan from the very beginning of time is still coming. All that Elijah needs to do is continue to tell people about God when he's given the chance to tell people about God. There's so much that I feel like I personally can relate to in this, that I think your kids are going to relate to in this. Who doesn't love a good fire story? And so your bottom line is, the wisest thing I can do is I can cry out to God. I know there have been times where I have leaned on my own understanding, that I have relied on Christy too much. I've not only relied on Christy, I've relied on other people to try to direct me. And that is not where our hope is found. That I should have gone to God a whole lot sooner, that I should have been willing to acknowledge that God was in the middle of something a whole lot sooner than I was able to. And so what we can do, and the wisest thing for us to do, is to cry out to God, because he hears us and he is working in spite of us. So your social activity, you've been playing this pay attention game. I hope the kids are having fun with that. Just a reminder, these games are supposed to be silly games. Kids love to play games. I have noticed it in every group, every time, that the kids really love playing the games and figuring out how to play it and figuring out how to relate to each other in these games. What a game gives you is the opportunity to relate to each other without having to spend a whole lot of time correcting and telling people they're not relating to each other well, because the game is already set up to allow them to relate to each other. So, the activity is more for you to build relationship, because once you've built relationship with a kid, then you'll have the opportunity to share big truths with them, especially our 3 and 4-year-olds, because they're beginning to see the world is big, and they want to know that there is a God who is there in the middle of it with them. So that will be your social activity. You'll do your large group teaching, and you have your video that you can watch to help direct that as well. And then you can use some of my words if you want. Or remember, in our app, there's also a video attached to our lesson each week. If you have the Parkway app, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's a box that says group resources. Click on that. Click on the date, which is September 15th. It should be Ask Resources September 15th. And at the top of that page, there'll be a video produced by the Gospel Project, who writes the curriculum that we use many of the activities from. And they give a really good biblical explanation for what's going on in our story today, and also help you connect it to Jesus and God's promise of Jesus to come and make a way for us to have a relationship with God that we wouldn't have had if God wasn't working his plan out over time. Your small group activity today should be a fun one. In fact, I know you have a bunch of kids who are super, super creative. What you have is a bag full of all kinds of little goodies in here. These little bags have air-dried clay in them. It's like the Color Wonder. I think Color Wonder, is that what it's called? Air dry clay. And so you could, if you needed to, because you have so many kids, you can split this. This is plenty of clay. Half of this is plenty of clay for one kid to make their creature out of. And what they're going to do today is create an imaginary pet. Now stay with me for a minute, because by creating imaginary pets and letting our kids explore what their imagination can create, we're helping show them a little bit how imagination can create something that isn't. So, like Ahab and the prophets of Baal, We can possibly begin to see how in our mind we can create something that is not true and not real, even though our imagination can create all kinds of things. And imagination is really good as long as we remember who the creator is. And so they're going to create their imaginary pets, and then you have some really good discussion questions on here. To kind of work through with the kids as they're creating their pets. The paper plates are here. Some of this clay stains a little bit, and so if they want to make their animal on their paper plates that doesn't stain as much, you are welcome to do that. The stain comes out. It's not a permanent stain, but it may make a little bit of a discoloration on the table or on a kid for a small amount of time. It will wash out though. And then the pipe cleaners that are cut are for them to add legs or antenna or whatever else they want to their imaginary pet if they would like to. They should be able to stick that straight into the clay and hold it in place. Now, if they can keep their imaginary pet from rolling off their plate when they leave today, then it should dry in about 48, 72 hours. The clay should dry, and then they should be able to have their pet to use as an imaginary pet and tell stories about. So have fun with that activity. Your memory verse is from James 1:5. Remember, we talked about this a little bit ago. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. There are no motions right now. I didn't create any motions for this. If you have motions that you'd like to do, you are welcome to do that for the kids. You could also use your quiet voice or your loud voice or your little bitty voice. And so however you want to do that, to say it so that the kids begin to learn the words and memorize it. When we store these words in our head for future knowledge, it will help us on a day where for me, it helps me on a day where I'm forgetting all of the promises that I know are true. So the things that are stored in my head sometimes will help remind me faster than even reading words on a page will, because I've committed those things to memory and I know that they are true. And I believe in the God who tells me that he will give to me generously if I ask. All right, and then you can pray and send your kiddos home. Just a little bit of good news for you guys. This last week, I was working on a document that we've created to track all of the new families that we've had in the last year at Parkway Victoria. And as of September 1st, we have had 107 new families come to Parkway Victoria and check kids in 2019. That's from January until the end of August. We have had 107 new families. That means all of our groups are growing in number. That also means we have a whole lot of new kids to help explain who Jesus is, many of them for the very, very first time in their whole life. Many of the families that we have who are coming, some of them, this is their very first touch in a church setting, or to understand that there is a God and he gave us a Savior so that we could be rescued and have a relationship with him. So I say all that to tell you, if you are feeling like things are different and your group of kids is different, you are right. Your group of kids is different, and it's going to continue to be. This is a trend we've seen throughout the whole year. We haven't had a month where we have had 0 new families. And so with that in mind, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. You're going to keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to do my best to try to resource you and get you prepared and ready to go. And keep praying. Keep praying for these families. Keep praying that God changes their hearts. And I say that because what we know is because they don't have an understanding of God and Jesus and the Bible, they still need for us to help them develop that. So that's why I'm saying that God changes their heart so that they will begin to embrace this and change their family for the rest of their lives. Thank you for leading and loving kids and building relationships that build disciples.